Book of Heaven, Volume 3, Part 6. February 27th, 1900. The divine will binds Jesus to the soul. The great evil of murmuring. Having abandoned all of myself in the lovable will of our Lord, I saw myself all surrounded by my sweet Jesus, from outside and from within. By having abandoned myself in him, I saw myself as if my being had become transparent, and wherever I turned, I could see my highest good. But what caused my amazement was that while I saw myself surrounded by Jesus inside and out, so was I, my poor being, my will, surrounding Jesus, as though within a circle, in such a way that he would not be able to find an opening to go out, because my will, united to his, kept him chained, without any possibility that he might escape me. O admirable secret of the will of my Lord! Indescribable is your happiness. Now, while I was in this state, blessed Jesus told me, "My daughter, in the soul who is completely transformed into my volition, I find sweet rest. Her soul becomes for me like those soft objects that cause no bother to someone who wants to rest. On the contrary, be they even tired and suffering people, the softness and the pleasure they receive in resting over those objects is such that, upon waking up, they find themselves strong and healthy. Such is for me the soul who is conformed to my will, and I, as recompense, let myself be bound by her will, and I make the divine sun shine in her, as in the full midday." Having said this, he disappeared. Then, later on, after I received communion, he came back and transported me outside of myself. I could see many people, and Jesus told me, Tell them that great is the evil they do by murmuring about one another, because they draw my indignation, and with justice, because I see that while they are subject to the same miseries and weaknesses, they do nothing but raise tribunals against one another. If they do this among themselves, what should I, who am pure and holy, do with them? According to the charity which they exercise toward one another, so do I feel drawn to use mercy with them. Jesus was saying this to me, and I repeated it to those people, and then we withdrew. March 2nd, 1900. The union of wills is that which most binds the soul to Jesus. This morning, after I received Holy Communion, my sweet Jesus made himself seen crucified, and I felt drawn interiorly to reflect myself in him, so as to be able to resemble him. And Jesus reflected himself in me, to draw me to his likeness. While he was doing this, I felt the pains of my crucified Lord being infused in me, and with all goodness he told me, "I want suffering to be your nourishment, not as mere suffering, but as the fruit of my will. The most sincere kiss that binds our friendship more strongly is the union of our wills, and the indissoluble bond that will clasp us in continuous embraces will be the continuous suffering. While he was saying this, blessed Jesus unnailed himself, took his cross, and laid it within the interior of my body. And I, too, remained so stretched as to feel my bones being dislocated. Even more, a hand, but I cannot tell with certainty whose it was, pierced my hands and feet through. And Jesus, who was seated on the cross that was laid in my interior, was all pleased with my suffering, and with the one who was piercing my hands. And he added, "Now I can rest in tranquility. I do not even have to take the trouble to crucify you, because obedience wants to do everything herself. And I freely leave you in the hands of obedience." And moving quickly from upon the cross, he placed himself upon my heart in order to rest. Who can say in how much suffering I was left, being in that position? After I remained like this for a long time, Jesus would not deign to relieve me as the other times, so as to let me return to my natural state. That hand which had put me on the cross, I could not see it any more. I said this to Jesus, and he replied, "Who put you on the cross? Did I perhaps do it? It was obedience, and obedience must remove you from it." It seems that this time he wanted to joke, and by his highest grace I obtained that blessed Jesus would free me. March 7th, 1900. The soul who is conformed to the divine will binds God. This morning, finding myself outside of myself, I had to go round and round to find blessed Jesus. Fortunately, I entered into a church, and I found him on an altar where the divine sacrifice was being celebrated. Immediately I ran to him and I embraced him, telling him, "Finally I found you. You made me go round so much to the point of tiring myself, and you were here." And he, looking at me with seriousness, not with his usual benignity, told me, "This morning I feel very embittered, and I feel all the necessity to lay hand to chastisements in order to free myself of this load." And I immediately, "My dear, this is nothing. We will remedy it quickly. You will pour your bitternesses into me, and so you will be relieved. Isn't it true?" And he, condescending to my words, poured his bitternesses into me. Then afterwards, clasping me all to himself, as if he had freed himself of a heavy weight, he added, "The soul who is conformed to my will knows how to infiltrate herself so much into my power as to reach the point of binding me completely, and according to her liking, she disarms me as much as she wants. Ah, you, how many times you bind me." And while saying this, he assumed his usual sweet and benign appearance. March 9th, 1900. Grace is like the sun. As I was a little disturbed because of something which it is not necessary to say here, my mind wanted to go wandering, to find assurance on my disturbance, and so remain at peace. But blessed Jesus, wanting to contradict my will, prevented me from seeing what I wanted. And since I insisted in wanting to see, he told me, "Why do you want to go wandering? Don't you know that one who goes out of my will goes out of the light and confines himself into darkness?" And almost wanting to distract me from what I wanted, he transported me outside of myself, and changing subject, he added, "Take a look at how ungrateful men are to me. Just as the light of the sun fills the whole earth, from one end to another, in such a way that there is no land which does not enjoy the benefit of its light, and there is no one who can lament he is without its beneficial influences. And this is so true, that in order to be able to give light to all, investing the whole universe, the sun takes it as though in its hand. Only one who, escaping from its hand, goes to hide in dark places, can lament he does not enjoy its light. And still, continuing its charitable office, the sun does not cease to send him a few glimmers of light through its fingers. So is my grace, an image of the sun, which inundates the people everywhere, poor and rich, ignorant and learned, Christians and unbelievers. No one can say he is without it, because the light of truth and the influence of my grace fill the earth more than the sun in its full midday. But what pain is in seeing people who, passing through this light with their eyes closed, and confronting my grace with the pestiferous torrent of their iniquities, deviate from this light, and live voluntarily in dark places, in the midst of cruel enemies. They are exposed to 1,000 dangers, because not having light, they cannot know clearly whether they are in the midst of friends or enemies, and therefore escape from the dangers that surround them. Ah, if the sun had reason, and men were able to give this affront to its light, and some of them to irritate and not to see its luminosity, reach such ingratitude as to pluck their eyes out, so as to be more sure of living in darkness. Ah, instead of sending light, the sun would send laments and cries of sorrow, such as to turn all nature upside down. Yet, what one would have horror in doing to the natural light, men reach such excess as to do to my grace, confronting it in this way. But my grace, always benign with them, in the midst of darkness itself and of the madness of their blindness, always sends glimmers of light, because my grace never leaves anyone. It is man who voluntarily goes out of it. And grace, not having him within itself, tries to follow him with the glimmers of its light. While saying this, sweet Jesus was extremely afflicted, and I did as much as I could to console him, praying him to pour his bitternesses into me. And he added, "Bear with me if I am a cause of affliction for you, because once in a while I feel all the necessity, with my beloved souls, to pour out, in words, my pain for the ingratitude of men, so as to move their hearts to repair for such an excess, and to compassion for men themselves. And I, Lord, what I would like is that you do not spare me from sharing in your pains." And as I tried to say some more, he disappeared from me, and I returned into myself. March 10th, 1900, Effects of suffering and of obedience. This morning, having received Holy Communion, I saw my dear Jesus as a child with a lance in his hand, an act of wanting to pierce my heart through. And since I had said something to the confessor, wanting to reproach me, Jesus told me, "You want to shun suffering, and I want you to begin a new life of sufferings and of obedience." And while saying this, he pierced my heart through with a lance. And then he added, "Just as the fire burns according to the wood that is placed in it, thus exercising greater activity in burning and consuming the objects that are thrown into it. And the greater the fire, the greater the heat and the light it contains. The same with suffering and obedience. The greater they are, the more the soul becomes capable of destroying what is material, and obedience gives her the shape it wants, like soft wax." March 11th, 1900. Encounter with a soul in purgatory. It continues almost always in the same way. This morning I saw good Jesus, more afflicted than usual, threatening a mortality of people. And I saw that in certain towns many were dying. Then I passed by purgatory, and as I recognized a late friend of mine, I questioned her about various things regarding my state, especially whether my state is will of God, and whether it is true that it is Jesus who comes, or the devil. In fact, I said to her, "Since you find yourself before the truth, and you know things with clarity, with no possibility of deceiving yourself, you can tell me the truth about my things." And she said to me, "Do not fear. Your state is will of God, and Jesus loves you very much. This is why he is pleased to manifest himself to you." And I, proposing some of my doubts to her, prayed her to be so kind as to see before the light of truth whether they were true or false, and to do me the charity of coming and letting me know. And if she did that, as recompense I would have a mass celebrated in her suffrage. And she added, "If the Lord wants it, because we are so immersed in God that we cannot even flutter our eyelashes if we do not have his concourse. We dwell in God just like a person who dwelled inside another body, who can think, speak, look, operate, walk, insofar as it is permitted to him by that body which surrounds him on the outside. In fact, for us it is not like for you, who exercise your free volition, your own will. For us every will has ceased. Our will is only the will of God. From it we live. In it we find all our contentment, and it forms all our good and our glory." And while she was showing an unspeakable contentment for this will of God, we separated. March 14th, 1900. How to draw souls to Catholicism. Since the confessor had given me the obedience to pray the Lord to manifest to me what should be done in order to draw souls to Catholicism, and to remove so much misbelief, I prayed for several days, and the Lord would not deign to manifest himself on this point. Finally, this morning, I found myself outside of myself, transported into a garden, which seemed to me the garden of the church. And in it there were many priests and other dignities who were discussing this topic. While they were discussing this, A dog of enormous size and strength came out, and the majority of them were so scared and exhausted as to let themselves be bitten by that beast, and to withdraw like cowards from that enterprise. That fierce dog had no strength to bite only those who had Jesus in their hearts as the center, who thus came to form the center of all their actions, thoughts, and desires. Ah, yes, Jesus formed the seal of these people, and that beast was left so weak as to have no strength even to breathe. Now, while they were discussing, I heard Jesus from behind my shoulders saying, "All other societies know who belongs to their party. Only my church does not know who her children are. The first step is to know who those are who belong to her, and these you can know by establishing one day a reunion to which you will invite them, so that those who are Catholic should convene to the appointed place for such reunion. And there, with the help of lay Catholics, they should decide what is suitable to do. The second step is to oblige to confession those Catholics who convene, which is the most important thing that renews man and forms the true Catholics. And this not only for those who are present, but they should oblige the leaders to oblige their subjects to confession. And if they do not succeed with gentle manners, they should even dismiss them from their service. Once each priest has formed the body of his Catholics, then will they be able to move forward to superior steps. In fact, recognizing the opportunity of the time, the way in which to penetrate into other parties, and the prudence in exposing themselves, is like the pruning of trees, which makes them produce large and mature fruits. But if the tree is not pruned, it does make, yes, a beautiful pomp of leaves and of flowers. But as soon as a frost comes down, or a wind blows, since the tree does not have enough sap and strength to sustain so many flowers in order to change them into fruits, the flowers fall off, and the tree remains stripped. The same happens in the things of religion. First, you must form a suitable body of Catholics, so as to be able to confront the other parties, and then you will be able to penetrate into the other parties to form a single one." After he said this, I did not hear him any more, and without even seeing him, I found myself inside myself. Who can say my pain at not having seen blessed Jesus for the whole day, and the tears I had to shed? March 15th, 1900. Jesus feels disarmed by the victim souls. Since he continued not to come, I was consumed with sorrow, and I felt such a fever as to become delirious. Now, since the confessor came to celebrate the divine sacrifice, I received communion, but I could not see my dear Jesus as usual, so I began to speak my nonsense. "Tell me, my good, why do you not make yourself seen? This time it seems to me that I have given you no occasion to withdraw. How can you just leave me like that? Ah, not even the friends of this earth act in this way. When they have to be apart, at least they say goodbye to each other. And you say not even goodbye to me. How can it be? Is this the way to behave? Oh, forgive me if I speak in this way. It is the fever that makes me delirious, and makes me reach folly. Who can say all the nonsense I spoke to him? It would be like wanting to waste time. Now, while I was raving and crying, Jesus showed now one hand, now one arm. Then I saw the confessor giving me the obedience to suffer the crucifixion. And Jesus, as though forced by obedience, made himself seen. And immediately I said to him, "Why were you not letting yourself be seen?" And he, showing a serious appearance, said, "It is nothing. It is nothing. It is that I want to chastise the earth, and if I am on good terms even with one creature, I feel disarmed and I have no strength to lay hand to the chastisements, because when I make myself seen, if you see that I have to send chastisements, you begin to say, 'Pour them into me, make me suffer.' And I feel conquered by you. So I never lay hand to the chastisements. And men do nothing but grow bolder." Now, as the confessor continued to repeat the obedience of making me suffer the crucifixion, Jesus showed himself slow in letting me do this obedience, not like the other times, when he immediately wanted me to submit myself. He said to me, "And you, what do you want to do?" And I, "Lord, whatever you want." Then, turning to the confessor with a serious aspect, he said to him, "You too want to bind me by giving her this obedience to suffer?" And while saying this, he began to share the pains of the cross with me. Then, showing himself appeased, he poured his bitternesses, and then he added, "The confessor, where is he?" And I, "Lord, I do not know where he went. Surely I do not see him with us any more." And he, "I want him, because just as he refreshed me, so I want to refresh him." March 17th, 1900. Sorrow of the Pope. Humility. This morning, blessed Jesus made me see the Holy Father with open wings, going in search of his children, in order to gather them under his wings. And I could hear his lament saying, my children, how many times I have tried to gather you under my wings, and you escape from me. Oh, please, listen to my moans. Have compassion for my sorrow." And while saying this, he cried bitterly. It seemed that it was not only the secular that were moving away from the Pope, but also priests, and these gave greater sorrow to the Holy Father. How pitiful it was to see the Pope in this position. After this, I saw Jesus, who echoed the laments of the Holy Father, and added, "Few are those who have remained faithful, and these few live like foxes withdrawn inside their dens. They are afraid to expose themselves in order to pull their children away from the mouths of the wolves. They speak, they propose, but those are all words cast to the wind. They never come to deeds." Having said this, he disappeared. After a little while, he came back. I felt all annihilated within myself in the presence of Jesus. And he, seeing me annihilated, told me, My daughter, the more you lower yourself within yourself, the more I feel drawn to lower myself toward you, and to fill you with my grace. Hear then how humility is bearer of light. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 3, Part 6. Fiat.